Hello, the story I have for you today is a book that has lots of stories in it. It's called Rhinos and Raspberries. It's got all kinds of different stories from around the world. And this story is called Old Joe and the Carpenter. It's from a place called Appalachia, which is in places like Kentucky, Virginia, Ohio, West Virginia. And it's where a lot of people will live in the mountains, and they have a beautiful culture. And so this is a story from their culture. Here's a picture. So look, sometimes they have farms. Look at those beautiful farms. Old Joe lived way out in the countryside, and he had one good neighbor. They'd been friends all their lives. And now that their spouses were buried and their children raised, all they had left were their farms and each other. But for the first time ever, they had an argument. It was over a stray calf that neither one really needed. It seemed as though the calf was found on Joe's neighbor's land, and so he claimed it as his own. But old Joe said, "No, that calf has the same markings as my favorite cow, and it's mine." Well, they were both a bit stubborn, so they just stopped talking to each other. It seemed that a dark cloud had settled over old Joe until there came a knock on his door 1 week later. He wasn't expecting anybody, and as he opened the door, he saw a young woman who had a box of tools on her shoulder. She had a kind voice and dark, deep eyes, and she said, "I'm a carpenter, and I'm looking for a bit of work. Maybe you have some small jobs that I can help with." There she is. There's the carpenter. A carpenter is someone who builds things. Old Joe brought her into the kitchen and sat her down and gave her some stew that he had on his stove. There was also home-cooked bread, fresh churned butter, and homemade jam. While they were eating and talking, Joe decided that he liked this young carpenter, and he said, "I do have a job for you. Look right there through my kitchen window. You see that farm over there? That's my neighbor's place. And you see that creek running right down there between our property lines? That creek, it wasn't there last week. My neighbor did that to spite me. He took his plow out there and he dug a big old furrow from the upper pond and flooded it. I want you to do something to him. Since he wants us divided that way, you go out there and build me a big, tall fence, so I won't even have to see his place anymore." And the carpenter said, "Well, if you have the lumber and the nails, I got my tools, and I'll be able to build something that you'll like." Joe had to go to town to get some supplies, so he hitched up the wagon and showed the carpenter where everything was in the barn. And the carpenter carried everything she needed down to the creek and started to work. The carpenter's work went smooth and fast. She did her measuring and her sawing and her nailing. It was about sunset when old Joe returned, and the carpenter had finished her work. When old Joe pulled up in that wagon, his eyes opened wide and his mouth fell open. There wasn't a fence there at all. It was a bridge going from one side of the creek to the other. It had handrails and all. It was a fine piece of work, and his neighbor was just starting to cross the bridge with his hand stuck out. And he was saying, "Joe, you're quite a fellow to build this bridge. I'd have never been able to do that. I'm so glad we're going to be friends again." And Joe, he put his arms around his neighbor and said, "Oh, that calf is yours. I've known it all the time. I just want to be your friend too." Look at that. There they are, crossing the bridge. About that time, the carpenter started putting her tools in the box, then hoisted it onto her shoulder and started to walk away. And Joe said, "Wait, come on back, young carpenter. I want you to stay on. I got lots of projects for you." The carpenter just smiled and said, "I'd like to stay on, Joe, but you see, I can't. I got more bridges to build." So she walked on, and there ends the tale. See, that's the story about if you're upset at somebody, really the best thing to do is to try to fix it. Because what if the carpenter hadn't come? First there was the creek, which is another word for creek, and then there would have been a fence, and then what would they have done? And they didn't have any other friends, they just had each other. But thankfully the carpenter came and helped them to see that it was better to be friends with each other. Have you ever felt really mad at somebody like that? Sometimes it can be hard to fix it. Remember, his neighbor said, "I couldn't have done that." It can be hard to take that first step and try and fix things and say, "I was wrong." It's very hard, even for grown-ups sometimes, to say that I was wrong. But when you can admit that, when you can say that you made a mistake, It really helps people to feel better and to get back together. I hope that story helps you think. I hope you liked it. I'll see you later. Bye.